Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see all of you here this evening. Welcome to St. Michael's, and welcome to this celebration of the life and loves of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, especially where they impinged on his life, on the life of this village of Highgate. I'm Reverend Kunle Ayodeji, and the vicar of this parish. Coleridge and his family are buried immediately below the stone slab in the middle of the central aisle, where his epitaph is engraved. They were reinterred here in April 1961, having been originally buried beneath Highgate's school chapel throughout the 19th century. We at St. Michael's are deeply conscious of our responsibility for the upkeep, care, and maintenance of the grave, and do indeed very much support the efforts of the Coleridge Trust, who wish to refurbish the grave area and the crypt in which it is situated. Tonight's Coleridge theme centers on his ends and his beginnings. To start off with, let us welcome Sir Paul Coleridge, Catherine Worth, Howard Rogers, and Corinna Marlowe. And also let us welcome Kenneth Michaels, who is going to tell this story with the help of our four readers who are seated behind me. Over to you, Kenneth.
Thank you, Kunle. It might seem strange to begin a tribute to one great poet by reflecting on the words of another, but there is more to the relationship between Coleridge and T.S. Eliot than meets the eye. Both had severe marital problems. Both lived in Highgate. Eliot for but a short period, it is true. Both forsook Unitarianism for the Anglican Church. Both men's writings were furiously influenced by their approach to religion. And both were buried in churches. And Eliot knew something about endings. "In my beginning is my end," he wrote. And later, "In my end is my beginning." Coleridge would have recognized the sentiment, for he was always arriving somewhere at the moment he seemed most lost. A schoolboy, exiled from home, a young radical dreaming of new worlds, a husband already drifting from marriage, a father imagining redemption through his child, a poet whose greatest work came early, and a man who lost himself in opium and argument. And finally, an aging figure who came here to Highgate at the edge of exhaustion. Just across the road at number 3, The Grove, he spent the last 18 years of his life under the care of Dr. James Gilman and his family. His final recorded words were,
"I could almost be witty."
A week later, his funeral procession crossed the road to St. Michael's, according to Molly Lefebvre.
A small but dignified funeral cortege set out from number 3, The Grove. A handsome hearse drawn by 4 coal-black horses, like the hearse lavishly adorned with black plumes. 2 elegant mourning carriages followed. The coffin, draped with a pall as handsome as the hearse, contained the mortal remains of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The cortege processed to the nearby church of St. Michael's, where the clergyman, Mr. Mentz, was waiting to receive the coffin. There were 9 persons, all male, in the mourning party, 2 of them, by their appearance, clearly brothers. They and 4 of the other gentlemen reverently bore the coffin into the church, where a handful of neighbours and servants from the Grove completed the congregation. During the service, there were many openly in tears. After the service, he was carried back to the hearse and conveyed the short distance to the burial grounds in Highgate Old Church, beneath where the school chapel stands today. Here the Gilmans, in whose household STC had lived for the past 18 years, had purchased a vault for use by their family. The remains of Miss Lucy Harding, Mrs. Gilman's sister, had already been placed there. Sam was placed alongside Miss Harding, a lady for whose company in life he felt no particular fondness. Yet now it seemed his dust was fated to repose with hers so long as dust should last.
And so the poet entered the earth at Highgate. For all we know, Miss Harding is still there, lying beneath the new school chapel built in 1867 over what was to become a family mausoleum. First his wife, Sarah, then his daughter, Sarah, his son-in-law, Henry, and finally grandson, Herbie, followed him into that tomb. And there they lay in a rotting, cheap, concrete mausoleum until 1961, when the whole family was removed to a 17th century wine cellar which lies beneath this church, beneath that slab in the center of the central aisle. They lie there still. An ending? Maybe, but endings were never simple with Coleridge. Again and again, throughout his life, he would seek not merely places, but households. The Evans family in London, the Frickers in Bristol, the Wordsworths in Somerset, the Hutchinsons in Yorkshire, and the Gilmans here in Highgate. He had a strange gift for entering other families while remaining painfully estranged from his own. If this was a gift, then you can sense STC's early beginnings, roaming St. Mary's churchyard in Ottery St. Mary in Devon, where he was born, baptized, and brought up as the youngest of 10 children, 8 brothers and 1 sister. His early education was from his beloved father, the town's local vicar and headmaster. His father's death and Samuel's removal to Christ's Hospital School in London was an uprooting experience from which he never recovered. And perhaps that is where his story truly begins. As a boy, he lost his heart to Mary Evans, the daughter of a London milliner. He walked her home along the Strand with her brother Tom, his school friend from Christ's Hospital. But it was not only Mary he loved the household, the mother, the sisters, the warmth of belonging. And that pattern would repeat itself throughout his life. Years later, he caught sight of Mary, again by chance, outside St. Giles's Church in Wrexham. He never forgot her.
And though in distant climes to roam, a wanderer from my native home, I fain would soothe the sense of care and lull to sleep the joys that wear. Thy image may not banished be. Still, Mary, still I sigh for thee.
From school at Christ's Hospital, there came a whirlwind of many endings and beginnings. A not altogether salubrious spell at Jesus College, Cambridge, where he combined brilliant scholarship with excessive drunkenness, political activism, and too many of what he described as unchastities. He left in 1793 before the end of his 3rd year, overwhelmed by debt, appalling depression, and remorse at Mary's rejection. A short, disastrous spell in the Light Dragoons ensued, an army regiment in which he enlisted, curiously as Silas Tompkin Cumberbatch. He was bailed out by his brothers, only to embark on several years of journalism, political activism, poetry, and political writing. He had long struggles with his close friend Robert Southey over pantisocracy, a communistic idyll they planned to found on the banks of the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. The movement collapsed over disputes about finance and the roles of women and servants. 2 beginnings formed the bookends to this turbulent part of his life. His marriage to Sarah Fricker in October 1795 and the birth of their firstborn, Hartley. In between, they moved into a cottage in Somerset's Nether Stowey, where he briefly intended to live a rustic, self-sufficient life, alone with wife and babe, a sort of socialistic pantisocracy, if you like, but without the nuisance of having to live with anyone else. Both marriage and paternity brought some of his loveliest poetry, some written shortly after he had met his wife-to-be, Sarah, sister-in-law to his great friend, Robert Southey. He had fallen for
her bright, animated face, her bubbling ringlets of brown hair, her quick, teasing wit, and generous, carefully laced figure, turned out in the latest shop fashion.
Were he and Sarah really ill-suited? Probably. Much later, after he had met William and Dorothy Wordsworth, the latter put her finger on it when she told her sister-in-law that she considered Coleridge and his wife ill-matched.
Sarah would make a very good wife to many another man. But for Coleridge, her radical fault is want of sensibility. And what can such a woman be to Coleridge? She is an excellent nurse to his sucking children.
But in the beginning stages of their life together, when he might have felt he'd lost his heart to her, he wrote The Kiss. The first verse was set to music by this church's director of music, Paul Dean. Please listen to a recording of that beautiful piece. Sir Paul Coleridge will recite the remaining verses.
Yon viewless wanderer of the vale, the spirit of the western gale, at morning's break, at evening's close, inhales the sweetness of the rose, and hovers o'er the uninjured bloom, sighing back the soft perfume. Vigour to the sever's wing, her nectar-breathing kisses fling, and he the glitter of the dew scatters on the rose's hue. Bashful, lo, she bends her head and darts a blush of deeper red. Too well those lovely lips disclose the triumph of the opening rose. O fair, O graceful, bid them prove as passive to the breath of love. In tender accents, faint and low, well pleased I hear the whispered no, how little meant, sweet falsehood that endears consent. For on those lovely lips the while dawns the soft, relenting smile, and tempts with feigned dissuasion coy the gentle violence of joy.
If marriage produced a beautiful poem, fatherhood created a masterpiece. Written late on a freezing night in Nether Stowey, his baby cradled in his arms, he gave voice to all the hopes and anxieties felt by all new parents. Corinna will read an extract from Frost at Midnight.
Dear babe, that sleepest cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings, heard in this deep calm, fill up the interspersed vacancies and momentary pauses of the thought. My babe, so beautiful, it thrills my heart with tender gladness, thus to look at thee, and think that thou shalt learn far other lore and in far other scenes. For I was reared in the great city, pent mid cloisters dim, and saw naught lovely but the sky and stars. But thou, my babe, shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores, beneath the crags of ancient mountain, and beneath the clouds, which image in their bulk both lakes and shores and mountain crags. So shalt thou see and hear the lovely shapes and sounds intelligible of that eternal language which thy God utters, who from eternity doth teach himself in all, and all things in himself. Great universal teacher, he shall mold thy spirit, and by giving make it ask. Therefore, all seasons shall be sweet to thee, whether the summer clothe the general earth with greenness, or the redbreast sit and sing betwixt the tufts of snow on the bare branch of mossy apple tree, while the nigh thatch smokes in the sun thaw, whether the eve drops fall, heard only in the trances of the blast, or if the secret ministry of frost shall hang them up in silent icicles, quietly shining to the quiet moon.
What makes the poem more moving is that the child answered it. Nearly 40 years later, Hartley Coleridge wrote back to the father who had imagined his future.
Father and bard revered, to whom I owe whate'er it be my little art of numbers, thou in thy night watch o'er my cradle slumbers didst meditate the verse that lives to show, and long shall live when all alike are low. Thy prayer how ardent, and thy hope how strong, that I should learn of nature's self the song, the law which none but nature's pupils know. The prayer I heard was, I wandered lonely like a breeze by mountain brook and solitary meres, and gathered there the shapes and fantasies which, mixed with passion of thy sadder years, composed this book. If good therein there be, that good, my sire, I dedicate to thee.
The prayer was heard, but not entirely. Hartley inherited much from his father: imagination, tenderness, instability, and sorrow. The pattern repeated itself. To live close to his dear friend and benefactor, Tom Poole, Sam moved to Stowey with Sarah and newborn son Hartley in January 1797. 6 months later saw him at last come to that greatest beginning of all, the meeting with William and Dorothy Wordsworth. He was crossing a field in Dorset toward a house called Racedown, not 20 miles from Stowey, where he knew that Wordsworths lived. Dorothy looked up and saw him bounding downhill through the corn, and she called to her brother. Their meeting changed English poetry forever. Biographer Richard Holmes writes,
"Here, at a gate that still exists, he paused to look over the little valley of the river Siderford. Below him, across a field of corn, he could see the square brick Georgian facade of Racedown Lodge among a little grove of beech trees, with a woman's figure working the vegetable garden behind. She looked up, and he vaulted the gate and hurried down the hill through the corn towards her." Wordsworth later wrote, "We both have a distinct memory of his arrival. He did not keep to the high road, but leaped over a gate and bounded down a pathless field, which he cut off at an angle. He remained at Racedown for a fortnight, during which two of the greatest friendships of his life were formed, irrevocably, for good and ill.
Richard Holmes stresses that the sort of welcome the Wordsworths gave him was, for them, extremely unusual.
Coleridge seemed a sort of incarnation of the romantic, poetic personality. His impact was physical as much as intellectual. It was not merely his writing, it was his talk, his face, his daring intelligence, his eyes, his warmth, his supreme attention to everything about him. For Dorothy Wordsworth, he was like some astonishing natural phenomenon. She wrote in a letter to Mary Hutchinson, soon to become William's wife, "At first, I thought him very plain. That is, for about 3 minutes. He is pale and thin, has a wide mouth, thick lips, not very good teeth, longish, loose-growing, half-curling, rough black hair. But if you hear him speak for 5 minutes, you think no more of them."
As the world now knows, the fusion of the two poets' intellects and artistry led to the writing and publishing of the lyrical ballads containing the Gothic masterpiece, The Ancient Mariner, for which Coleridge is so universally known. In this extract, he deals with the beginnings of redemption as the mariner begins to look at life anew.
Beyond the shadow of the ship, I watched the water snakes. They moved in tracks of shining white, and when they reared, the elfish light fell off in hoary flakes. Within the shadow of the ship, I watched their rich attire, blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. O happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. The self-same moment I could pray, and from my neck so free, the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. Oh, sleep, it is a gentle thing, beloved from pole to pole. To Mary Queen, the praise be given, she sent the gentle sleep from heaven that slid into my soul. The silly buckets on the deck that had so long remained, I dreamt that they were filled with dew, and when I awoke, it rained. My lips were wet, my throat was cold, my garments all were dank. Sure, I had drunken in my dreams, and still my body drank. I moved and could not feel my limbs, I was so light, almost I thought I died in sleep and was a blessed ghost. And soon I heard a roaring wind. It did not come anear, but with its sound it shook the sails that were so thin and sere. The upper air burst into life, and 100 fire flags sheen. To and fro they were hurried about, and to and fro and in and out the wan stars danced between. And the coming wind did roar more loud, and the sails did sigh like sedge, and the rain poured down from one black cloud. The moon was at its edge. The thick black cloud was cleft, and still the moon was at its side. Like waters shot from some high crag, the lightning fell with never a jag, a river steep and wide. The loud wind never reached the ship, yet now the ship moved on. Beneath the lightning and the moon, the dead men gave a groan. They groaned, they stirred, they all uprose, nor spake, nor moved their eyes. It had been strange, even in a dream, to have seen those dead men rise. The helmsman steered, the ship moved on, yet never a breeze up blew. The mariners all gan work the ropes where they were wont to do. They raised their limbs like lifeless tools. We were a ghastly crew. The body of my brother's son stood by me, knee to knee. The body and I pulled at one rope, but he said naught to me. I fear thee, ancient mariner. Be calm, thou wedding guest. 'Twas not those souls that fled in pain, which to their courses came again, but a troop of spirits blessed. For when it dawned, they dropped their arms and clustered round the mast. Sweet sounds rose slowly through their mouths and from their bodies passed. Around, around flew each sweet sound, then darted to the sun. Slowly the sounds came back again, now mixed, now one by one. Sometimes a dropping from the sky, I heard the skylark sing. Sometimes all little birds that are, how they seem to fill the sea and air with their sweet jargoning. And now 'twas like all instruments, now like a lonely flute. Now it is an angel's song that makes the heavens be mute. It ceased, yet still the sails made on, a pleasant noise till noon, a noise like of a hidden brook in the leafy month of June, that to the sleeping woods all night singeth a quiet tune.
Music was one of the poet's great delights, the contemporary Baroque especially. That great master of the genre, Mozart, had visited London a few years before Coleridge's birth and had written his first symphony there at the age of 8, and would surely have been a Coleridge favorite. Here, Antonio Marabito, an international concert pianist and piano tutor with the Royal College of Music Teaching Service, will play for us Mozart's Fantasy, followed by two of Scarlatti's Baroque sonatas.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this special occasion. It's a couple of times that I play in St. Michael, and it's always a pleasure to play for this wonderful community. The first piece is this Mozart's Fantasy, but it's a quite unknown fantasy actually, because you might know the very famous C minor and E minor fantasy, but this one is another C minor fantasy that is very rarely played. So I'm very glad to play this piece, which is an absolutely gem of the piano literature, and I think it's very much connected with poetry actually, because as Mozart usually does, in this piece we can see the alternance between light and darkness, as in every poem we would read, but instead of the words, here we have the notes. And followed by these two Scarlatti sonatas. Scarlatti is one of the most important Italian Baroque composer who invented actually the sonata form. And his dad was Alessandro Scarlatti, a very famous opera writer. And in fact, also this music, I will say, is very narrative, and these sparkling themes that you will hear are very, very much connected with a sort of characters in theater. So you might see these two characters followed by each other, or run or fight against each other. So it's a very narrative sonata, the Scarlatti's one, and I will show you two of the most sparkling ones. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Marvellous. Antonio Moravito. Superb. Now back to Coleridge. Post-Somerset, post the Ancient Mariner, his life fluctuated between some great poetry, though arguably none to match his nether Stowe peak. Increasingly, he turned to philosophy, theology, and criticism. In many ways, his life was a messy tangle. Everything was clouded by the worsening impact of his laudanum consumption. He was deeply aware of the damage it was causing him, and it was ruining his marriage. That was a relationship hardly improved with his last love. The last time he didn't just lose his heart, he threw it away. Sarah Hutchinson, Wordsworth's sister-in-law, was the beneficiary of the gift. She, Azra was STC's private name for her, was part of the Hutchinson family, friends of the Wordsworths, living at Sockburn in Yorkshire.
He met her there in the autumn of 1799 and quickly fell in love. Standing round a fire in the Hutchinson household, he wrote later about telling stories, laughing, and secretly holding Sarah's hand for a long time behind my back. Then love pierced me with its dart, envenomed and, alas, incurable.
2 years later, in early July 1801, he visited the Hutchinsons again in Yorkshire and described,
lying with Azra under a willow tree, both their heads cradled on Mary's lap, lying on a sofa in the kitchen in the firelight, with Azra's body pressing a brooding warmth against his breast, and one unforgettable moment of tenderness when all three curled on the sofa while Mary stroked his brow and Azra tickled his cheek with her eyelash.
According to Holmes, innocent as they were, these sensations came back to haunt Coleridge with obsessive sexual force. The emotions first were sublimated in his great ode, Dejection, and later he recalled the experience when he wrote,
"It was as calm as this, that happy night when Mary, thou and I together were, the low decaying fire our only light, and listened to the stillness of the air. Oh, that affectionate and blameless maid, dear Mary! On her lap my head she laid. Her hand was on my brow, even as my own is now. And on my cheek I felt thy eyelash play. Such joy I had, that I may truly say, my spirit was awestruck with the excess and trance-like depth of its brief happiness."
The relationship seems to have ended in Sarah's rejection of the poet in 1803, though they met occasionally through the next decade. That early, almost coy emotion turned almost inevitably into a deeper and completely unfulfillable love.
There are two things of all which men possess that are so like each other and so near as mutual love seems like to happiness. Dear Azra, woman beyond utterance dear, this love which ever welling at my heart, now in its living fount doth heave and fall, now overflowing pours through every part of all my frame, and fills and changes all, like vernal waters springing up through snow. This love that seemeth great beyond the power of growth, yet seemeth ever more to grow. Could I transmute the whole to one rich dower of happy life, and give it all to thee, thy lot, methinks, were heaven, thy age eternity.
This intensity fueled, and was fueled by, his growing dependency on laudanum. And it was this struggle which, with the help of many friends, brought him here to this village, Highgate, in April 1816. In nearly all respects, he was at the end of his tether. He was close to collapse. The poetry had largely fallen silent. The opium habit governed his days. Friendships had frayed and marriage had long since failed. And yet one final household remained, waiting for him here in Highgate. He came to this small, quiet village on the outskirts of the city in a certain depth of despair. But in Morton House, only yards from this church, and at number 3, the Grove opposite, he finally arrived at what was perhaps his last beginning. For the last time in his life, he was gathered in. Here he met Dr. James Gilman, and it was into this, another family and household, into which he was brought. From here, Gilman successfully brought the opium habit more or less under control. He did not cure him entirely, nothing would. But the family steadied him, protected him, made space around him, and here something in him quietened. For years he'd given away his heart, in London to Mary, in Bristol and Somerset to Sarah, in Yorkshire to Azra. His heart was vanquished, but when he came to Highgate, he found his soul. And it was here that he was able to write the great Royal Society lectures on poetry, his thoughts on the relationship between church and state, a book on advanced logic, and Aids to Reflection, an important religio-philosophical text. And it was here that his difficult relationships with all his family were either at least stabilized or improved. He found his soul not in triumph, not in sudden revelation, but in endurance, friendship, thought, prayer, conversation, and the slow recovery of self-respect. The great poetry was mostly behind him, yet the mind remained extraordinary. Young writers, students, clergymen, philosophers flocked to Highgate to hear him talk. Many left dazzled, some left bewildered, but none ever forgot him. There was fun here too. Dr. Gilman's granddaughter recorded that
in his walks around Highgate, the poet was often followed by children, to whom he was a familiar and welcome figure. They would surround him, my grandmother told me, and pull at his coat-tails, well knowing that sweets would be forthcoming. His love and admiration of children are the best proof of the simplicity and uncorrupted quality of the poet's nature. Of children, he was wont to say, "They are the books from which I have learned the most."
it was a view reinforced by the testimony of the Reverend William Harness.
Coleridge, in his old age, became a characteristic feature in Highgate. He was the terror and amusement of all the little children who bowled their hoops along the Poplar Avenue. Notwithstanding his fondness for them, he called them his kingdom of heavenites. His cyclopean figure and learned language caused them indescribable alarm. Sometimes he would lay his hand on the shoulders of one of them and walk along discoursing metaphysics to the trembling captive, while the rest fled for refuge and peeped out with laughing faces from behind the trees.
Nor was it without humour. His granddaughter recalls,
"My father in his youth was sometimes sent up to the poet's room by his parents to ask for assistance on some difficult point in his school studies. This the poet often volunteered to give, but on one occasion, my father afterwards told me, his mentor gave him such a long discourse, interspersed with so many illustrations, even going back to the days of creation, that waiting in vain for the desired elucidation, he was obliged to walk backwards to the door, then gradually in the same position going down the stairs, the poet stepping down after him, still enforcing his argument. He had to take advantage of a third person's appearance and retreat with his exercise out of the garden door."
And as a final record of the Coleridge effect, here is the poet and man of letters Samuel Rogers to reassure you that sometimes the Coleridgean bubble could be pricked. He called on him in Highgate with a distinguished fellow guest and recorded his own impression of those impressive powers. Let me introduce you to Samuel Rogers. And next to him, the distinguished poet, William Wordsworth. They had walked to Highgate to call on Coleridge at 3 The Grove when he was living at the Gilmans. They sat with him for 2 hours, he talking the whole time without intermission.
When we left the house, he walked for some time without speaking. Then,
What a wonderful man he is.
wonderful indeed.
What depth of thought, what richness of expression.
There's nothing like him that ever I heard.
Pray, did you precisely understand what he said about Kantian philosophy?
Not precisely.
Or about the plurality of worlds?
I can't say I did. In fact, if the truth must out, I did not understand a syllable from one end of his monologue to the other.
No more did I.
And gradually, the circle closed. The child who had wandered among the graves at Ottery St. Mary, the young man who dreamed of remaking society, the poet who blessed the water snakes, unaware, the father praying over a sleeping child, and the restless guest in so many homes. He came at last to rest here. A few months before his death, he wrote his own epitaph, his own thoughts about his ends and his beginnings. It is less a monument than a plea. To end this evening, Sir Paul Coleridge, a descendant of the poet's family, will now read the verse STC wrote from the commemorative slab in the centre of this church, which lies directly above the family's coffins. Sir Paul.
Stop, Christian passerby, stop, child of God, and breathe with gentle breast beneath this sod of poet lies, or that which once seemed he. Oh, lift one thought in prayer for STC, that he who many a year with toil of breath found death in life, may here find life in death. Mercy of praise, to be forgiven for fame, we ask and hope, through Christ. Do thou the same.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Drew Clode. I'm the Secretary of the Coleridge Trust, and I'm here really to thank you all for coming and hopefully enjoying this evening. There are a few thanks I have to give before sending you off to the bar. First of all, I must thank Emma, Alan, and Dominic, who have been such valuable members behind the scenes and backstage. They were really terrific, helped all the way through. Antonio was fantastic. He's not here. He's had to go to catch a plane to go to give a recital in Milan. Oh, what does he do? What has Milan got to offer that we have? Anyway. And finally, or not finally, but Connolly and the church for allowing us to put this show on, as it were, and for all the help they've given and support. Not just for this evening, but to the whole trust enterprise itself. So many thanks to Cunley. And, well, Sir Paul, Corinna, Howard, Catherine, and our narrator, Ken. Many thanks for what you've done for us tonight, and many thanks to you for coming here and helping us appreciate our own work. Thank you.